Welcome to Fantasy Football Today. We're doing things a little bit different today. As you can see, we're adhering to the stuff going around the country, around the world, and we're trying to be safe. So we're all doing it from our home setups. I'm Jamie Eisenberg. And as you can see in the box, Dave Richard, Heath Cummings, Pete Prisco, we're reacting to what we just heard from Tom Brady talking to the media for the first time. And Pete, I'll start with you. What do you think about this Brady move? How excited are you for this team? What do you think it's going to do for this Tampa Bay offense?
Oh, I think it's going to be an improvement for that offense, no question about it. He's a quarterback who plays it a lot safer than Jameis Winston did. That's something Bruce Arians really wanted. He got tired of all the turnovers. But, you know, for Brady, it's got to be exciting to be able to look at Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and guys that can get down the field and be able to make some throws down the field. In recent years, and in fact, aside from the Randy Moss years, he hasn't been able to drive the ball down the field consistently like he would like to do. So I think he's excited about it. I think it's good. I think the relationship between he and Byron Leftwich will be one that not only will help Tom Brady and he'll help Byron Leftwich, because I think Byron Leftwich will be a head coach sooner rather than later.
So, guys, we spent a lot of time after the announcement that Brady was joining the Bucs talking about his fantasy value. But, you know, based on the news conference, we could sort of reiterate some of those things again. So, Dave, I'll start with you. What does this do for him as a fantasy quarterback? I moved him to number 10 in my rankings. I think he's a excellent starting option this year with these weapons, as Pete just alluded to, in Bruce Arians' offense. What about you? How do you think he's going to do?
I think he's an excellent starting option as well, Jamie. The only problem is that there are a lot of excellent starting options in fantasy football in 2020. He's one of the quarterbacks that you should wait for on draft day, not one of the guys that you're going to take in round 5, round 6, 7. I think he's going to be closer to round 8 or 9. That's when people should draft him. I'm not completely sold on taking guys like Aaron Rodgers and Matthew Stafford ahead of Tom Brady, but I do think they've got a chance to be pretty good as well. And look, I got to hand it to Brady. Last year was a terrible year for him. Nobody really was excited about having him on a fantasy team. Still finished as a top 12 fantasy quarterback, even though his receivers dropped 34 passes last year, second most for any quarterback in 2019. I think that number is going to go down with Godwin and Evans catching passes for him. So having him as a top 12 quarterback, I think it's more of a starting point, and it's just a matter of how soon you're willing to take him that determines just how big of a top 10 type of a quarterback he should be. So, for example, Jamie, I think you're probably more excited to take him than I am, so you might be willing to take him in round 6 or round 7 because you've got him as a top 10 quarterback.
Never take a quarterback in round 6 or round 7. Just continue to wait. That's the best strategy I can give you. Heath, you're the projections guy. What are you projecting for Tom Brady right now going into 2020 with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
Yeah, Dave said top 12 is a starting point. And for me, like, my starting point is projections. And I plugged in Tom Brady's career norms along with Bruce Arians' offense and what they did last year. And I came up with him as number 4 quarterback. I had to dial that back real quick just because of his age. And I do think a point that was brought up a lot during the press conference, the lack of communication or practice that he'll have with these guys over the summer could be a really big deal if we get into June and July and that's still a factor.
So, Pete, address that. How do you think this is going to go? Because we're in unprecedented times. Obviously, we don't know what the offseason is going to look like. Brady has spent the last few off seasons not having to be with his team simply because he didn't have to, knowing Josh McDaniels' offense, knowing what he's had to do in that system. How much do you think that's going to impact his lack of rapport, most likely with Mike Evans, with Chris Godwin, just in terms of him getting on the same page with not only those guys, but also with Byron Leftwich and what Bruce Arians want to do?
Well, I think he'll be able to get on the same page with Byron Leftwich early because you can communicate, you can do Skype, you can do a bunch of different things to keep in touch with the offensive coordinator and in touch with the quarterback's coach and understand what they want him to do and what he likes to do. I think the biggest problem will be timing. And look, back in the day, they never had OTAs. They just, the season ended and you waited and then you went to training camp. Now, training camp was 6 weeks long. But I think that'll put an extra emphasis, if they do cut these down in a big way, on what kind of work you can get on the field, whether it's mini camp. Maybe every team has 1 or 2 mini camps and that's it, and then go to training camp. But whatever you do, I think these guys will go out on their own. And Tom Brady's done that before. Bring his guys out on his own in the time down, and maybe he'll throw to them on his own, Montana ranch or something. So I do think he'll get the work in. I don't think it's that big a deal.
Yeah, hopefully he does get the work in. Again, unprecedented times. We don't know what the travel situation will be or where those guys will have the opportunity to go throw together, but we do hope that's the case. Dave, when you look at Mike Evans, we'll start with him first. I know there's some concern about maybe the downfield throws, what that connection will be, what the rapport will be like with those two guys, especially what the numbers will be for Mike Evans, who's just been an absolute fantasy star. You still have him ranked as high. For me, he's still a top 10 guy, somebody I would take as early as number 7 overall at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, and the way that I feel about Mike Evans is that he's still going to be the 1A in the offense, and Chris Godwin, just by target volume, he'll be 1B, and that's great for Godwin, and I do like Godwin more than Evans. But you look at the deep ball passing statistics between Tom Brady and Jameis Winston last year, and they were similar in terms of efficiency. So to me, Brady could be just as good for Evans as Jameis was. The difference between them was that Jameis had like 30 more deep ball pass attempts than Tom Brady had. So I think that there's a real good opportunity for Mike Evans to come up with the numbers that he had last year, maybe even be a little bit more consistent because there won't be as many turnovers in Tampa Bay. I'm excited about drafting him. I think he's a number 1 fantasy receiver.
Keith, I don't know if you feel the same about Mike Evans as Dave does, but I know you're very excited about Chris Godwin. And just looking at Brady's track record, obviously throwing to the guys in the slot, Wes Welker, Julian Edelman, we know about the connection he had with those two guys. That seems to be where Chris Godwin's going to end up, depending on what the Bucs do to find a third receiver. So when you look at Chris Godwin, I think you like him better than DeAndre Hopkins. Am I mistaken on that?
No, I've got him as a top 5 wide receiver. Hopkins fell a little bit with his move, and I think this is outstanding for Godwin. I'm not really going to say that Tom Brady can't throw downfield anymore. I'm just not sure how much he wants to throw downfield because that generally involves holding onto the ball longer and taking more hits, and Brady's generally been averse to that. It's going to be very interesting to see who changes more from 2019. Is it Bruce Arians' offense or is it Tom Brady? I would assume it's going to be the offense, which could be a better thing for those short area targets and could make O.J. Howard a thing again.
Yeah, you say that, Heath. And Pete, I want to get your take on O.J. Howard because I know you spent some time talking to Bruce Arians about some of the guys in this offense. What do you think the outlook is for O.J. Howard now? Because we know Brady loves the tight end. You go back to, obviously, Rob Gronkowski, Aaron Hernandez, Martellus Bennett for a time. Can you think O.J. Howard bounces back in this offense with Tom Brady in 2020?
Yeah, I think O.J. Howard is going to have a big year for them. And you've seen it over the course of Tom Brady's career. You mentioned throwing to the tight ends, and it wasn't just one. Remember when they had Aaron Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski, it was 2. And so you do have 2 tight ends in Tampa, but I think this is a big year for O.J. Howard from a personal standpoint. He did not play well last year. They were not happy with him. He did some things that they weren't thrilled about. And I think this is a chance for him to refocus, get back, and show people that he is a real deal tight end. Now, he's got to improve his hands. That's one thing that they talked about, his hands. He's got to catch the football, but this guy has a chance to be a big-time playmaker in this offense with Tom Brady.
Yeah, it could be a great value pick depending on how late you're able to get him, but one of these tight ends that we've spent a lot of time talking about on our Fantasy Football Today podcast, you can download that wherever podcasts are found. Also, a big opportunity ahead for Ronald Jones if, in fact, he remains the starting running back for the Bucs. We'll see what happens with the NFL draft. So Tom Brady going to Tampa Bay. Good news for Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, hopefully for O.J. Howard, Ronald Jones, and Tom Brady now back on the map as a starting fantasy quarterback. So there's your Brady talk, but we got more Fantasy Football Today coming up for you next. We're going to get into what's the next move for Cam Newton. What about some other free agents that are still on the market? Where are they going to land? We're going to give you some fantasy destinations for you right here on CBS Sports HQ. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. As you can see, we're operating from home, and a player that has to find a new home is Cam Newton. ESPN reporting that Cam is expected to be released from the Carolina Panthers as early as today. And so we're looking at some of these guys that are available still after all the free agent signings and what could be the best fantasy destination for them. Pete, I'll start with you. Where do you see Cam Newton ending up? Is it going to be as a starter for 2020, or is he going to have to accept a backup job somewhere?
I think he's going to have to accept a backup job. You look around the landscape, I mean, the Chargers are a possibility, but they clearly like Tyrod Taylor as their bridge quarterback, so I don't think that makes sense. I think he's going to have to go back up somewhere and hope that, not hope, but there might be a chance where a guy gets hurt much like Teddy Bridgewater last year in New Orleans with Drew Brees, and he goes in and plays. So I don't think he's a starter this season. I do think he can start if he can get in shape, if he can show people that his body is healed. He can be a starter in 2021.
Keith, we spent some time on our Fantasy Football Today podcast talking about the dynasty outlook for some of these guys, Cam in particular. When you're looking at it from a dynasty perspective with Cam Newton, what's the value right now with him maybe doing what Pete said, having to accept a backup job, or who knows what his future holds?
Well, and I think because of that uncertainty, you can't view him as anything more than a low-end number 2. He's on the wrong side of 30. He has the injury history, and now we don't know. Like, I still perceive Cam Newton as someone that if he had a starting job, I'd want to have on my fantasy roster in 2020. NFL GMs so far aren't behaving that way, and it has to be a little bit to do with the medicals and how difficult it is to get a player in for a physical right now. But if he ended up on a team like the Chargers with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, that value would jump right back up. But for now, he's outside of my top 20 dynasty quarterbacks.
Dave, if I were to tell you he takes the starting job in Jacksonville or he ends up in New England as the starter there, would you have interest in him as maybe a starting fantasy quarterback again in 2020?
Maybe in New England, maybe. And I would probably I'd definitely draft him way after Tom Brady. We're talking one of your last 2 or 3 picks. You might just throw the dart on Cam Newton if he's scheming with Josh McDaniels and Bill Belichick. And once upon a time, Belichick had some really kind words for Cam Newton. Talked about how difficult it is to defend him. That was 3 years ago. Lots changed since then. But if the Patriots realize that Brian Hoyer is just a backup and Jarrett Stidham isn't ready, I'm not sure what the Patriots cap situation is, but maybe they go and they get Cam Newton to be their stopgap for a year. Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, provided that he's healthy, and that's obviously the bugaboo here. If he isn't ready and if teams can't verify that he is ready, I'm not sure when he's going to sign, what the contract will look like, or what chances he'll have of being a starting quarterback.
Yeah, something that we're going to keep an eye on over the next several weeks, and hopefully we do get a destination for Cam. So for those of you that do have him in Dynasty or Keeper Leagues and looking to see what his value is for 2020 or for when we start doing our fantasy drafts, we got a fantasy mock draft that we're doing right after the show. We're going to talk about that all throughout the week on CBS Sports HQ, as well as look at the other free agents that have already signed. What we're going to do right now, based on what's happening with Cam Newton, take a look at some of the free agents that are still out there and give you maybe some good landing spots for them to help their fantasy value. So here are the top remaining free agents that we're looking at that have still yet to sign with their teams. Jameis Winston, another quarterback, obviously. Tom Brady has replaced him. Devontae Freeman released by the Atlanta Falcons, replaced by Todd Gurley. Robbie Anderson and Brashad Perryman, the 2 top wide receivers that are still on the market. And let's start with Robbie Anderson, because I thought he was going to sign somewhere and maybe be the number 1 receiver for the Eagles, have a chance to be a good complementary piece to another passing attack. Pete, what's the holdup with Robbie Anderson finding a destination after the first wave of free agency?
Well, I think it's twofold. One, off the field stuff in the past is probably turning off some teams if his price is too high. And then the second thing is it's a deep wide receiver class. And a lot of these free agents that are left, Robbie Anderson, Perriman, I think teams are going to balance it where they say, is it worth spending X amount of dollars on those guys when we can wait and maybe get a receiver in the 2nd or 3rd round that will also give us value immediately in our passing game? So I think they're being hurt by Robbie Anderson's being hurt by both those things, and I think Perriman as well being hurt by the deep draft.
Dave, we've talked a lot about maybe the Eagles as a good landing spot for Robbie Anderson. If he ends up at a team like that, a team, let's say like San Francisco, a team that's looking for some wide receiver help, even if he stays with the New York Jets, can he be somebody that's a borderline starting fantasy option?
Sure, but it's going to take being on a team that's got a great quarterback in order for him to get there. And, you normally think about the Jets, they don't have a great quarterback. Well, Sam Darnold is actually pretty good, and this is the wide receiver that he has the most chemistry with. So I wouldn't be opposed to drafting Robbie Anderson in those double-digit rounds if he goes back to the Jets. I also wouldn't have a problem with Robbie if he went to Philadelphia. They certainly have a need. What about teams like Oakland, or you mentioned San Francisco, Jamie? I don't think that those offenses are strong enough to make Robbie Anderson even a bench fantasy receiver. Don't think he'll get consistent targets. Think he'll be very boom or bust if he's playing in those towns.
Yeah, maybe Green Bay as well, just looking for a complimentary option. opposite Devontae Adams. Speaking of a Devontae Freeman, again, let go by the Falcons. Heath, when you look at Devontae Freeman, last year was a little bit of a struggle for him. He did put some good numbers together in the passing game, but he's not going to end up as a starting option on a team most likely, but as a second option, pass catcher out of the backfield. Can he still have some fantasy value? And again, what are you telling dynasty managers right now about Devontae Freeman?
I mean, for a dynasty manager, you're hoping he signs a contract soon and then you can deal him, because at his age and with the problems he's had with injuries and what the profile looks like as just a third down back, I don't think he's likely to be a starter over a full season in the near future, and he does still have that name appeal. The one place that could change that is the place we've been saying for every running back, and that's Tampa Bay. If they decided to give him a one-year deal and he had to compete with Ronald Jones, well, maybe Devontae Freeman has a chance to beat him out because he can pass block, and then maybe he has a chance to be a top 24 running back again.
I appreciate that transition, Heath, as I go to you, Pete, on Jameis Winston. So you talked earlier when they asked you, the guys, Jeremy and Brandon, during the Tom Brady press conference about you thought the Bucs would be a playoff team with Jameis Winston. Obviously, he was a great fantasy quarterback last year, 5,000 yards, 33 touchdowns. The interceptions were a problem, which is why he was replaced by Tom Brady. But when you look at Jameis and the landscape for him, do you think it's going to be the same thing like Cam Newton? He has to accept the backup job somewhere, or could he end up as a starter still somewhere for the 2020 season?
I mean, if he went to Jacksonville, I think he had a legitimate chance to beat out Gardner Minshew and be the starter. I'm not sure that they want to do that. I think he would go to the Chargers and beat out Tyrod Taylor. I'm not sure they want to do that. So I think his options are probably going to be a backup. And Pittsburgh would be a great destination for him. He could back up Ben Roethlisberger. We know Ben has trouble staying on the field, so maybe he could get on the field there and show what he could do. Or even New Orleans. I mean, look, we saw what Teddy Bridgewater did when he played in those 5 games. Maybe there's an opportunity for him in New Orleans. If Drew Brees were to go down, he could step in and play. So I think he'll be a backup this year and get an opportunity to play and then be a starter, much like Cam Newton in 2021.
All right, Heath, same question. Dynasty-wise, does Jameis Winston carry any value right now, just looking at his scenario?
The nice thing in regards to Cam is he doesn't have the same injury history as Cam. He's not as old as Cam. So I do think that Jameis has a little bit more upside in terms of dynasty. He's still outside of my top 18 quarterbacks, though.
All right, so we'll find out where Jameis goes, where Robbie Anderson goes, where Cam Newton goes. We know where Tom Brady is. He's in Tampa Bay and going to be a great fantasy quarterback. We have a lot more fantasy football today coming up to you this week. Like I said, we're going to break down some of our mock drafts. We're going to give you more free agent talk. And, of course, you can check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast, where we get into all of these topics, including answering your questions and more. Thank you for watching Fantasy Football Today. More fantasy football coverage coming up later this week.